The following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it is Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. We're going to be talking about lemons and peaches and buying and selling and facts. And I have a great guest today who's going to be talking about architecture. We've got a lot of things to cover, so let me get right to it. So when I was growing up, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, but when I was growing up, a friend of mine, his mother had what today we'd consider a nervous breakdown. And when she went to the doctor's prescription to get over a nervous breakdown in those days, he said to her she should take up smoking. That was the doctor's prescription. Smoking. Calm your nerves, settle you down. Yeah. In those days, we didn't believe you were going to die a lot sooner, but that was the approach. You know, when you think back, as you think back over the years, there was a time in which they were prescribing or recommending that meat was good for you to eat. And then we went through a phase where meat was bad for you to eat. And then we went through another phase where meat was good for you to eat. And then it was bad. And I don't know what it is today, you know. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. There was a time, a long time ago, when we thought the earth was the center of the universe. Everything revolved around us. Look in the sky. The sun goes around, the moon goes around, the stars come out at night. The earth was the center of the universe. And then we discovered we weren't the center of the universe. In fact, we were not even the most important part of the solar system, that we revolved around the sun, not the sun revolving around us. Remember back when the internet was a dial-up connection? You know, you'd plug it in, it went through the phone line. You know, that was a dial-up connection. And what about chemistry? When I was growing up in high school, there were 106 elements in the chemical table, in the table of elements. 106. You know, today there's 118, and it's growing by 10%. Every so often, they add one or two more elements. And my guess is that as we go along, we're going to see it grow to probably 200 elements, and a number of those will be man-made. There's a book that was published a few years ago called The Half-Life of Facts, Why Everything Has an Expiration Date, book by Samuel Arbesman. They talk about, you know, if you pick up food, it's got an expiration date. If you pick up medicines, they've got expiration date. We're getting to a point where most facts now have an expiration date. And we live lives. We live lives in a linear fashion. Life seems to change at an ongoing rate. You know, this morning I had a meeting in Bellevue. I drove from my home. I plugged the information into the GPS, told me it was going to take 37 minutes to get there. Sure enough, it took me a little over 37 minutes, but pretty close to 37 minutes. On the way back, it told me it would take me 24 minutes to get to the office, and it took me 24 minutes to get to the office. So traveling at a consistent speed back and forth, and if you have traffic, you slow down. But basically, without traffic, you can drive 60 miles an hour on the freeway, and it takes the same amount of time to go as it does coming back. You know, in many ways, life seems to be linear, but in fact, it tends to be linear from a very short, up-close perspective. I sometimes ask the question, if you had a penny, you start with a penny one day, and it doubled every day. how much would you have at the end of 30 days? Penny today, 2 cents on tomorrow, 4 cents the day after that. What would you have? As you're listening, think about it in your mind. Think about how much you would have. You know, a lot of people will say 10,000, 100,000. You know, the fact is, the answer is, it's $10 million at the end of 30 days. But on that last day, you get half of that. $5 million comes on the last day. $2.5 million comes on the day before the last day. 75% in the last 2 days. So if you look at the curve, if you're plotting that out, the curve looks like it's really linear at the beginning. It looks like a straight line. But as you get further out, as you get toward the end of those 30 days, as you get today into the 20s or the high 20s, that curve really starts to mount up in a hurry. You know, that's how a lot of life is. We talk about nuclear reactions or nuclear. You had the meltdown in Japan, the nuclear reactor that melted down, and that nuclear goes away. It has a half-life. It decays. You have a half-life of X number of years. Talk about medicines in your body having a half-life of 24 hours or 2 days. A lot of things have a half-life, and that's the same is true of facts. In medicine, our knowledge of medicine is increasing and doubling every 87 years. Genetics is doubling every 32 years. So looking at it a different way, genetics has a half-life of 32 years now. It will have 16 years and then 8 years. It's decreasing. Chemistry, 35 years. And each time we move forward, it becomes more difficult to find the resources and greater resources. Think about what's going on in the world today. 80% of all the scientists who've lived in the last 300 years are living today. 80% of all the scientists who have lived in the last 300 years are alive today. You know, if you think about that in terms of what's going on in the economy, what's going on in terms of wealth, if you think about that in terms of investments, investments are not linear either. You know, there's just a small fraction of the revenues that come into a company in the early startup days, but it ramps up very, very fast, and it ramps up even faster as time goes along. If you look at some of the classic examples, it took Microsoft 14 years to go from zero in revenues to $1 billion in revenues. It took Facebook and eBay only 7 years to go. And it took Zynga only 4 years to go from zero to $1 billion. Right now, the big go word and the big buzzword in private equity is they're looking for companies that are blitz scaling. Blitz scaling means they ramp up very, very fast. They ramp up so fast, it's hard to find competitors. You look at some of the companies that have been blitzscaling, like the two taxi companies that the two largest taxi companies in the world don't own a single taxi, Uber and Lyft. The largest hotel chain, which ramped up very, very fast, blitzscaled, does not own a single hotel room. That's Airbnb. The largest media company in the world owns not one piece of content, not one piece of media content, and that's Facebook. So those things are, people are looking for companies that can blitzscale and move up very, very fast. Not in a linear fashion, but in an exponential fashion. And when you look at companies, and you look at even the internet, how much has changed. Remember, in 1994, on the Today Show, Bryant Gumbel was the host, and he was asked to read an email address out loud. 1994. And he was at a complete loss, especially when it came to that A with the ring around it. It was baffling. And off the camera, he had to ask what the internet was. Now that @ sign has been on the typewriter and on keyboards since 1885. Underwood put it there. But who knew what it was? Certainly in 1994, Brian Gumbel didn't know what that A with the circle around it was. And think about it today. Everyone knows what that is. You know, the world is changing very fast. It's happening with drug companies. It's happening in biotech. It's happening with technology. It's happening even beyond technology. We're seeing that happen. And we're coming to a commercial break. We're going to talk about that because what we see are growth curves that look like an S, a sideways S. We're going to talk about that when we come back, and we've got a lot more to cover. We've got to talk about peaches and lemons. We've got to talk about buying and selling. And you want to hear my guests too. So don't go away. So much more to talk about and how all this applies to investing. Hang in there. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Don't go away.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I've been talking about how facts change and how much information is added to our database every year. How much knowledge is coming in through about drugs, about chemistry, about physics, about the world that we live in, the number of facts that's increasing, and the number of facts which are going away. I used the example, and I like this example. I'm going to repeat the example about 1994 when Brian Gumbel, who was the host of the Today Show, was asked to read an email address out loud. And he was at a loss when it came to that A with the circle around it. He had to ask what that was. And off camera, he had to ask what an internet was. I can remember I used to be asked at Rotary to give a talk on the outlook for the stock market. And I can remember in 1996 or 95, whenever it was, that I asked people, how many people here have an internet account or an email account? And out of a group of about 140 or 180 people, 6 people raised their hands. And I said, remember when people used to ask you, do you have a fax? They don't ask, this is in the mid-90s now, they don't ask if you have a fax anymore. They ask, what is your fax number? I said, the time will come when people will not ask, like I'm asking, people will not ask, do you have an email address? They'll say, what is your email address? Now, I never saw that we were going to have 2 or 3 or 5 email addresses, and I do have 3 that I use. I have a business. I have, because I get so many emails that incoming, because I follow so many stocks, I have maybe 500 or 600 emails a day that arrive. Most of those arrive on a special email address that I never respond to. It's just an inbound. And then I have a personal email as well. So 3 emails, and some people have a lot more than I do. So that's something that's happened. It's changing life. And it has an impact for investors. When you think, I was thinking the other day, and I think I talked about it on the radio, about the first TV set that my parents bought. It was a big deal. I was a child. We were one of the first houses in the neighborhood to have a TV. It was so expensive. It was several months' salary of one of my parents. Several months. You bought a TV and you signed up. I think they signed up for a 3-year contract to buy a TV. And it was 21 inches. It was black and white. It had no remote. You had to go up and twist the knob. It came with an antenna that you had to put up to receive the signal. There were 3 channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And most of the programs came in with snow. People today don't even know what snow is, but it's little white dots throughout the screen. And a lot of times you would get interference because the signal would get interference onto the antenna. And so the screen would do all sorts of wiggly and crazy things. But that was a big deal. It was expensive. And then I can remember when we got a color TV. It still had 3 channels. You still had an antenna, although we would convert eventually to a cable. And the screen got bigger, really bigger, 24 inches. That was a big deal. And it came in a cabinet. And the price was almost the same for a color TV that we got, our second TV, as it was for that black and white TV. And then we got another TV. And this time it had a remote. And it was 27 inches, I can remember. We're really upgrading. Originally 21 and black and white. Now we had 27 inches. And the remote, it was a clicker. You had to click. And each time you clicked, it moved up 1 channel. And we actually were getting 5 or 6 channels at that time. And we eventually had cable, which meant the snow went away. And then the next TV was actually 36 inches. It was a remote, very similar to the remotes these days. And we had a lot more channels. Then came the flat screen TV. And now TVs come 72 inches or 96 inches. The one that sits on my wall in my office is 43 inches. When I was first in the business and first got a TV, I can remember it was in the early 90s. I had an 18-inch screen, and it sat down on the floor. And, yeah, it was color. And it didn't get very much. It got CNBC. That was the big thing in the end of the 90s, CNBC and the advertisements. I used to love the advertisements, but that's another program. Now I have a 43-inch screen that I don't pay much attention to unless there's something of interest. But that's how things have changed. It's gotten bigger, it's gotten better, and for that 43-inch TV screen that sits in my office, it was less expensive dollar-wise, not adjusted for inflation, but total dollar-wise, than my parents when they bought that 21-inch black and white TV that they signed a contract for 3 years. And today, for the average person, they can buy that on a credit card and pay the credit card off every month. So it has an impact. All these things have an impact. There was a time in which blue chip companies, you could buy a company, buy the stock, put it in a drawer and hold it forever. But today we live in a time of disruptive technology. It disrupts investor portfolios. And if you think about the Dow itself, the original Dow included companies like American Sugar, Tennessee Coal, Iron, Tennessee Coal, Iron and Railway, U.S. Leather Corporation, National Lead, U.S. Rubber. I mean, who's ever heard of those companies? My average turn time now on stocks is about 2 years, and I'm very, very long in holding. Some stocks have been in my portfolios for almost 25 years, but that's unusual. Most change more often because the economy is changing. We're living in a disruptive time when facts are changing, and it's not alternative facts. It's not that the facts are wrong. It's that we're adding to the information. But as we do, companies have a half-life too. Companies have a life. I mentioned any number of times the work that Foster did. Richard Foster at Yale looked at the companies in the Standard & Poor's in 1920, had an average life of 70 years. Today that's down to 15 years. You think about in 1966, the blue chip companies, the ones that were the best of the best, Anaconda Copper, American Can, American Tobacco, Bethlehem Steel, Chrysler, General Foods, Goodyear, Johns Manville, Owen, Illinois, Swift & Company, Sears, Texas Corp, Union Carbide, U.S. Steel, Westinghouse Electric, and Woolworth. Most of those companies, if they're not out of the Dow, are bankrupt and gone. And conventional wisdom at that time, there was a book by Gilbreth that said would reach the peak of affluence in society, and the big corporations would dominate and small corporations wouldn't have a chance. And so that was in the early 1960s. And you think about companies that didn't exist when those companies that I mentioned in 1966, the blue chips, think of companies that didn't exist then. Microsoft, Intel, Southwest Bell, Home Depot, Walmart, McDonald's. All of those, part of the Dow. Plus, think of the other companies. Costco, Starbucks, Genentech, Amgen, Qualcomm, Cisco, and Salesforce. I mean, those companies did not exist in 1966, and they're major corporations today. It's easy to look back and see what was happening and where those companies were. It's harder to look forward. And we're going to talk about that later in the program when we talk about selling fast, buying slow. There's a new paper on that. We're going to talk about that when that comes out. Actually, the paper came out in November of last year. Less than a year old, but it's still intuitive and instructive. And it's going to change investing, I believe. It's a process of looking not just at a top-down approach, but from a bottoms-up approach. You know, when you look at where companies are, if you look, I use the illustration sometimes, looking back in the early 1950s, the dominating grocery store was Great Atlantic and Pacific, A&P. They were the largest retailing organization in the world, second only to General Motors in annual sales. And there was a small company called Kroger's that was less than half the size of A&P, not distinguished. But they began in the 1960s to transition and make it market critical. And the next 25 years, Kroger's grew 10 times faster than the Dow, 80 times faster than A&P. It's a matter of picking the right company at the right time. Addressograph and Pitney Bowes were almost perfectly matched. Revenues, profits, employees, stocks, charts, nearly monopolies in 1973. Pitney Bowes in postage meters, addressograph, and address duplicating machines both faced losing monopolies. By 2000, Pitney Bowes had 30,000 employees, revenues of $4 billion, addressograph 670. In those 27 years, Pitney Bowes' stock rose 3,581 times what addressograph did. And today, Pitney Bowes is on the ropes. We're going to come back after this commercial break. Don't go away. And once we come back, I'll be introducing my guest who's coming back. We're going to get a fill-in from what's been happening since he was on the radio a couple years ago. Don't go away. He's got a great message. He had a great message then. He's got another great message now. Stay with me. We'll be back right after this commercial break.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, welcome back. I'm here with Jeff Pelletier of Board and Vellum. So, welcome to the program, Jeff.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So, let's start with your background. Tell us about your background.
Certainly. So I'm from the East Coast originally. Went to college up at Cornell in upstate New York. Actually had the first year that had email addresses. So I was thinking about that when you were talking earlier. Moved out here in '01, and so I feel like I'm almost a local now because I've been here for, gosh,
almost 20 years.
I know.
Yeah.
A long-termer. I founded Board & Vellum in 2011. We have architects, interior designers, and landscape architects, and we're around 35 to 40 people. We do single-family work, it's about half our work, and we do multifamily apartments, townhomes, restaurants, coffee shops, and we also do parks in our landscape group.
So tell us about what's going on architecturally in Seattle. We know the real estate market has been hot. It's been difficult to buy a home. It's cooled off some. But tell us what you're seeing.
Certainly. The market is certainly strange in Seattle. Q4 of last year, we saw things pause a little bit. Not really slow down, but just kind of take a breath. And we all wondered, is this the time when things start to turn? And January 1st, it was like that hadn't happened. And there's been a steady growth period across the board. And that's true in talking to other architects, other design firms, and seeing what's happening. We're seeing kind of a constant growth, and it really is across all market segments. There's been a pause on lenders concerned with, are there too many apartments being built? Is that kind of a concern there? And the reality is there's still not enough housing being built to actually match the number of people moving here. So there's really kind of a supply and demand really working here in that regard.
So tell us about Board & Vellum and what you do.
Certainly. So it's been a fun run. I started the company in my attic, and now we've grown to a much larger size. We actually just expanded to take over the whole building at our office up in Capitol Hill. So we work on single-family remodels and new construction. We really kind of, our client base, make sure we deliver really great care. And we're trying to be innovative on that front and make sure that we're sort of on top of the trend. On the multifamily and commercial front, we really work with innovative, usually local developers or small business owners to make sure that they're creating a good footprint, a good anchor in the community. I love this town so much, and I think our clients and developers also love this town. And we all feel like part of what we're doing is trying to make this city better. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of apprehension, I would say, about change in Seattle. And one of the things that I always look back to is I grew up in a small mill town in New England, and it didn't change, and it really stagnated. And it's really, to me, a lesson of why growth is important. Now, it doesn't mean that growth has to happen regardless of taste or aesthetic or care. You can do it sensibly, but I think a town or city that does not grow is not a place anyone really wants to be.
Well, you went to Cornell, and I can remember when my son was looking for colleges, we looked in New York, and we drove from New York City up to the Finger Lakes and Cornell. And driving through a number of the small towns where you had factories that had their windows boarded up with plywood, and the towns. I can remember driving through one town where the sign said, welcome to, and I can't remember the name of the town, but it said, welcome to Boy Scout Troop Number, Cub Scout Troop Number. That was the town's claim to fame. And you could see through that whole process towns that were dying because they weren't growing.
Yeah. I mean, growth is really fundamental. If you look at just a city or an economy as a whole, when growth hits too low of a number, it stalls, and it kind of, everything kind of stops. And so it's interesting to me as someone who actually follows the economy and obviously loves design and what's happening with the city, that people are super afraid of change. And I completely understand it. If you have a favorite restaurant or if a building goes away, you think, why is this changing? But I know for me, I moved to Seattle in '01, and I was excited to be here, and people welcomed me. And so people want to move here. I want to welcome them and make sure that we at least welcome them to a better city.
So let's talk about the single family and what's going on there. It used to be, you started with a small home. When my wife and I got married, we had a 2-bedroom home. We had our daughter, Then we moved to a bigger home that was 3 bedrooms, and we continued to upscale. That you mentioned when you were on the program before, that's changed. Tell us what's going on.
It really has. Fundamentally, if you look at national numbers and what's happening with housing starts, if you look at what's happened over the past 10 years, before the recession, housing starts were pretty high, and then the recession, of course, happened, and it was traumatic across the board. But if you look at what houses are being built now, everything above 300 grand for a house is still being built. Those are still happening across the board, whether it's Seattle or nationally. But everything below 300 grand is simply not being built. The market doesn't really work. And so those small homes, those 1 or 2 bedroom homes that I grew up in, all of the people here grew up in as well, aren't happening. And there's really a lack of housing for people starting a family. And so they're looking at apartments, which is why the apartment market here is partially so strong, is because where else does a young family have to go? They're looking at townhomes, or we're seeing couples and families actually kind of partner up in a little bit of a co-housing network, where they'll find a house that's, maybe 2,000 square feet or 2,500 square feet, and 2 couples with 2 kids will think, well, we get along well enough. Why don't we buy this house together to get ourselves into the market? Well, whether that's sustainable longer term or not, who knows? But I think people are recognizing that they want to get in, and there's more and more limited paths to do that.
And so what's happening to the family that did buy the small home, and now they have 1 or 2 or 3 more children, and they can't afford moving up to a bigger home?
They are moving out, and that's a real challenge right now. One of the things that's happening, we're seeing, is that even employees, architects, don't necessarily make a lot of money. There's a perception that architects make a fortune, and we all wish it was true, but it's really not. And so a young architect with maybe a spouse and a kid, they're not really going to be able to afford to buy a house in Seattle. And so we're seeing families move out to places like Bremerton or really far on the south end. And so it becomes a challenge of how do we adapt as a company? Are we doing remote working, flexible working hours, flexible commuting times, things like that to really make that work? It's, I think, a challenge across the board for the local economy in a big way.
So, and you mentioned that you were doing house remodels. Talk about that.
I love remodeling a house. One of the pieces that I love is that you're getting to keep a bit of the history. And there's a term actually called embodied energy, that the forest has already been cut down, the trees have already been cut and milled into lumber. And so that house has value. It may not be big enough for your current family or current needs, but it works. And so solving that challenge of how do you unlock the potential of this beautiful old home and make it into a home that is going to have another 100 years is one of the real joys of my profession. And so we work on a lot of projects where we're really trying to sort of keep as much as we can, but make it live for a modern way.
So what reasons are people doing remodels now?
People have discovered the value of location. It could be the coffee shop down the street. It could be your kid's school. It could be adjacency to in-laws, whatever it is, or job or commute time. But people really want to be in very specific areas. And those areas have identities to neighborhoods and things like that. And so homes, there are only so many of them in Seattle. And so people want to be in a very specific neighborhood. And if they're already there, the incentive to remodel is so much higher. They also know that they can basically get what they want out of a house if they do it their way. They're afraid if they move, now they could be in a worse location, or they could have to move and remodel that house as well. So we might as well stay put. And even with real estate prices kind of plateauing at this point, the economics still make sense to remodel.
And when they remodeled the home and landscaping as well.
Yes, we are seeing a big trend towards people investing in projects in their yard. Investing in a house is frankly very expensive. We're seeing construction costs right now for a quote-unquote normal remodel between $400 and $500 a square foot, which is just a horrifying number for us as well. But their yard exists, and it's not free certainly, but being able to capture your yard, whether it's an outdoor room or using a fence, creating a fire pit, kind of creating outdoor rooms, that allows your living space on the nice months of the year to expand. And if you're really careful with coverage for rain protection, you can even extend that to like 9 months of the year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're doing all that work. Tell us how someone would get a hold of you.
Certainly. So our website is boardandvellum.com. There's some great contacts there. We also have a great blog. There's a lot of resources for people who need information on what it's like to remodel or start a project. just we like to write that content. But you can also email me at Jeff, Jeff, at boardandvellum.com.
And if they wanted to call, what would they call?
206-707-8895.
And tell us the website again.
Yep, it's Board and Vellum. That's BOARDANDVELLUM.com.
That's perfect. Thanks for being on the program.
Thank you so much.
It's really a change that we're seeing in Seattle. It's growth. And for me, I think that's a very positive thing, having come from a small town that was dying when I was there, which suddenly expanded to 75,000 people from 10. But that's a whole different story.
That's a whole different episode, probably.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for being on the program.
You're welcome.
When we come back after this commercial break, I'm going to be talking about lemons and peaches. Those are academic studies, actually. Lemons and peaches. The guy that wrote the study on lemons actually got the Nobel Prize for it. So, in 2001, we'll talk about lemons and peaches. We'll talk about buying and selling. So, don't go away. We've got a lot to cover. And go see the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. We'll be right back after this break.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So did you ever buy a used car? You know, go to the car lot, look at the car. It's got the sticker on the window, might be as is. It's a funny phrase, as is. What does it mean, as is? It's a used car, right? How do you know if you're getting a lemon? Well, you know, The Economist magazine points out that one of the most famous economic studies was done in 1970. It was by George Akerlof, and he got the Nobel Prize for the study. And the name of the study was The Market for Lemons. Not lemons the fruit, but lemons the cars. He showed when sellers know more than buyers, the market can actually dry up. And his example, talking about used cars, not fruit, his examples was that used cars can have hidden defects. Things that are known to the seller but not known to the buyer. Those cars are the lemons. And buyers, when they come to buy a used car, are looking for cars without those hidden defects. They want peaches, not lemons. They want something that's reliable. They want something that's going to serve them for a number of years, and they don't want to buy a lemon. So the point of the paper is when buyers don't know if what they're buying in a used car is a lemon or a peach, they reduce their offer. They shave the amount that they're willing to pay. They'll pay less because there's a greater risk that they're buying a lemon because the seller knows, but the buyer doesn't. And when the price goes down, according to the economic paper, that causes some of the peaches, those car owners who have a car that has no defects, the peaches back off. The price is too low, so they won't sell the car. And that means there's more lemons in percentage-wise than peaches. And so the price goes down a little further. And that means more peaches take their car off the market. And so the percentage of lemons goes up. And so the price goes down. And so more peaches take their cars off the market. And that means the percentage of lemons goes up and the price goes down. And more peaches take the cars off the market. So you get the price. You get the point. The prices keep dropping, and it means that peaches never get the right price for their cars. And he made the point that it applies not just to used cars, but to insurance and education and many other things. It's a case of lemons versus peaches. And for that paper, he got the Nobel Prize in 2001. It was a very, very famous study, lemons and peaches. But now comes a new study, It was done by Richard Blundell of the University College London, plus 4 others. And what they looked at was car prices, car ownership. They looked at income tax records, and where all that was available was in Denmark. So they looked at the impact of this. And they looked at depreciating cars over time. So they weren't looking at cars at a new price that didn't go down. They depreciated cars because cars do depreciate in value over time. So they looked at a yearly depreciation on cars and calculated how big a discount peach owners had to accept to sell their cars to somebody who was feeling that their car could be a lemon. Back to this price, peaches and lemons. Person that had a car that had no defects, trying to sell that car, how much of a discount did they have to give? Because the buyer of the car didn't know that the car didn't have defects. The buyer didn't know that they weren't buying a lemon. And the buyer wasn't willing to pay a peach price for a lemon car. Got that? Peaches and lemons. It's not apples and oranges, it's peaches and lemons. So they looked at it, and what they found is the discount. They actually calculated and used thousands of data points. They found that if somebody sold a car after 1 year, the buyer would take an 18% discount to compensate for the fact they didn't know if they were getting a lemon. They might be getting a peach, but there was an 18% discount from the price that they should pay if the car was a year old. In the second year, the discount had dropped to 8%. So if all cars had been peaches, people would have paid the regular depreciated price. But since they didn't know if they were getting a lemon or a peach, there was an 8% discount. By the third year, the discount had dropped to between 2 and 5%. And by the 9th year, there was no discount at all. By the 9th year, they figured, if it was a lemon, it was a lemon. If it was a peach, it was a peach. There was no discount whatsoever. And so maybe that explained why new car prices drop so much when you drive it off the lot. Because you buy a new car, drive it off the lot, the car price drops by a bunch. The fact is, that's economic theory, and economic theory can give you some guidance, but it's not always right. It's general information. As The Economist magazine says, the reality probably is different from that, and the reality is that the reality probably drives economists bananas. Anyway, I'd like that. Economics. It's one of those things which can give you a lot of guidance in a macro sense. It can also be completely wrong. So use it for what it's worth. So I want to shift to buying and selling stocks, because stocks have a price and a value. They have a share of stock has a certain value. This is what it's worth. This is part of the company that you own. It has a certain value, but it also has a price. That's what people are willing to pay for that stock. Bernard Baruch said it. He was a great investor in the 1930s and 40s. Art Cashin paraphrased it to say that the market is a perception market. When it believes that 2 + 2 = 5, people will pay 4 3/4 for it all day long. My corollary is that when people believe that 2 + 2 = 3, what they bought at 4 3/4, they'll sell for 3 1/4 all day long. I believe that the price, I believe the idea is to buy lower than the value and to sell when the price is higher. Eugene Fama, who I've mentioned a number of times because he got the Nobel Prize in 2013, he came up with the efficient market hypothesis that says price is always reflected in true value. Even if some investors trade irrationally, sophisticated experts would trade against them and eliminate any temporary mispricings. There have been a lot of papers that have pointed that out and say that retail investors tend to be overconfident, sensation-seeking, limited attention, and so there tend to be mispricings by retail investors, but there haven't been any of the studies that have been done until recently about institutional buyers. Institutional buyers tend to be, when they're buying a stock, very, very careful when they're buying, but when they're selling, they often pick the wrong criteria. And that paper shows they'd be better off to pick stocks that they're selling on a random basis than on the criteria they're using. They'll tend to sell stocks that are up 50% or down 50% much more often than they sell on a random basis. And so their returns are worse. Not much time to cover that because we spent too much time talking about lemons and peaches, but we'll come back to this and talk about it another day at another time. Anyway, that wraps it up. Have a very good week, and I'll be back next Saturday, because if it's Saturday, we will be talking about money.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.